Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The air was thick with the weight of an impending storm, yet it wasn't just the weather that pressed down on Lucas's shoulders. His village of Grey Hollow, nestled in the shadow of the towering Darkspire Mountains, was a place where legends whispered in the night took root in every home. It had always been like that, a place teetering between the known and the supernatural, where even the bravest men feared the darkness. Lucas stood at the edge of the village, his gaze fixed on the distant, crumbling castle that clung to the cliffs like a forgotten memory. Lord Malachi. The name had surfaced again in the last few months, carried on the fearful whispers of the old and the curious stares of the young. Grey Hollow had lived in peace for years, but that peace had been shattered with the recent disappearances. It was subtle at first, a few missing sheep, a hunter who didn't return, but now it was undeniable, and so, Lucas found himself standing guard at the edge of his home, sword at his side, dread creeping into his bones. His sister, Elena, lay in their small home, fevered and pale. Whatever illness had gripped her wasn't natural, Lucas was certain of that. He had scoured the village for help, but even the healers seemed perplexed by the sickness ravaging her. If Malachi truly had returned, there was no doubt in his mind that his sister's ailment was a part of the darkness seeping back into their lives. Lucas tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword. He had heard the stories about Malachi. His father used to tell them around the fire, tales of a powerful vampire lord who had once ruled these lands. His reign of terror ended only when the villagers rose up against him. But they had never truly destroyed him. They had only forced him into a long, bitter slumber. Now, it seemed, the time of awakening had come. Just then, the ground beneath him seemed to shiver, as if the earth itself had sensed what was coming. The fog rolled in, thick and unnatural, swallowing the fields and roads, suffocating the air. Lucas drew his sword instinctively, scanning the darkness. The figure appeared, tall and shrouded in shadows. His presence was palpable, a living nightmare walking in the open. Lord Malachi had returned. "You know who I am," Malachi said, his voice smooth and cold as the fog around him. Lucas stood his ground, though fear clawed at his resolve. "I do. And you should know that I will not let you take my village." The vampire lord's lips curled into a smile, revealing sharp fangs. "Brave words. But you are a mortal man, bound by the frailty of flesh. I have lived for centuries, and this village is but a fleeting speck in the tapestry of time. I do not come to take it. I come to offer you a choice." Lucas's heart pounded, but he held his ground. "What choice?" "A blood pact," Malachi said, stepping closer, his presence suffocating. "I offer protection for your people. For your family. No more sickness. No more disappearances. All I ask for is loyalty. And a life. Yours." The words hit Lucas like a blow. His life. Of course, Malachi didn't want just his service. He wanted something far deeper, far darker. The thought of giving himself over to this creature was almost unbearable, but then an image of Elena flashed in his mind, pale, gasping for breath, so close to death. If it meant saving her, he would do it. "You want my life," Lucas said, his voice low. "In exchange for what?" "My village's safety." Malachi's smile widened. "Yes, and your family will live, untouched by my power." Lucas knew this was not a promise made in kindness, it was a deal with the devil. But what choice did he have? Elena had no time. The village had no defense. He couldn't let his people die. Slowly, with a weight that felt like it would crush him, he nodded. "I accept your pact." Malachi's eyes gleamed, and before Lucas could react, the vampire lord was upon him. Sharp fangs pierced his neck, and for a moment, the world dissolved into darkness. Lucas's body convulsed as the vampire drank deeply, sealing the pact with his blood. When it was over, Lucas fell to his knees, his vision swimming, his body weak and drained. Malachi loomed over him like a dark god, a twisted smile playing on his lips. "It is done," Malachi said, his voice like silk. "From this moment, you are bound to me. You will serve as my enforcer, and in time, your life will be mine." In the weeks that followed, Lucas's body was racked with pain. The blood pact was taking its toll, slowly draining him of his strength. At first, it was manageable, a small ache in his bones, a heaviness in his limbs, but soon it grew into something far more consuming. His once proud stance became slumped, his face gaunt, his skin pale. The villagers noticed. Some whispered that he had made a deal with the devil. Others simply avoided him. But they all knew something had changed. Elena, however, had recovered. The fever had broken the very night Lucas made the pact with Malachi, and though she was still weak, she was alive. Lucas clung to that fact as he served his new master. Each night, Malachi summoned Lucas to the castle. The tasks were always the same: root out dissent among the villagers, ensure their loyalty, and eliminate any who dared defy Malachi's rule. Lucas hated it. Every life he took, every family he destroyed, added to the weight of his guilt. But he was bound by the blood pact, and Malachi's will was law. Lucas's mind was plagued by nightmares, visions of himself as a monster, like Malachi, draining the life from those he loved. Each morning, he woke drenched in sweat, his body weaker than before. The pact was killing him, and yet, he could not stop. It was during one of his missions, deep within the ruins of an old chapel, that Lucas stumbled upon the journal. It had been hidden beneath the floorboards, dusty and brittle with age. The handwriting was shaky, the ink faded, but the words were clear enough: "To the next who falls under his spell, beware. The blood pact is a curse that will consume not just you, but your entire bloodline." Lucas's heart raced as he read on. The journal belonged to a warrior from centuries ago, who had made the same deal with Malachi. The pact had bound not just the warrior, but his children, his children's children, until the entire family had been wiped out, consumed by the curse. "There is only one way to break the pact," the journal said. "Destroy the bloodstone." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. He had heard of the bloodstone, a legendary artifact said to hold the power of the vampire lords. If it were true, if it still existed, destroying it could free him, could save Elena and the village from Malachi's rule, but the journal warned of the consequences. The bloodstone was hidden deep within the castle's crypt, protected by ancient magic. And worse, destroying it would release Malachi's true form, a creature of unimaginable power, kept at bay only by the bloodstone's binding. With the knowledge of the bloodstone, Lucas faced an impossible choice. If he did nothing, the pact would consume him, and eventually, Elena would fall victim to it as well. But if he destroyed the bloodstone, he would unleash something far worse than the vampire lord who ruled over them now. Lucas left the ruins that night with the weight of the journal's words bearing down on his soul. The path ahead was clearer now, but it was also darker, more treacherous. Destroying the bloodstone would save him, perhaps even save Elena and the village, but it would mean unleashing Malachi's true form. It was a gamble, and Lucas wasn't sure how many lives would be lost if he failed. For days, he avoided the vampire lord's summons, staying away from the castle while plotting his next move. He couldn't do this alone. If the bloodstone were hidden deep within the castle, he would need help getting past whatever protections Malachi had put in place. The old stories spoke of ancient traps, wards, and creatures that defended the crypt, and Lucas was no fool. He found Yara in the mountains, a reclusive woman who had lived on the outskirts of the village for as long as anyone could remember. Yara had once been a servant in Malachi's court, a member of his household, until she fled after witnessing the dark rituals that sustained his power. Most villagers thought her mad, but Lucas knew she was his only chance. When he arrived at her shack, she was waiting for him, as if she had known he was coming. Her hair was silver, her eyes cloudy with age, but there was a sharpness to her that belied her years. "So, you found the journal," she said without preamble, her voice low and raspy. "And now you think you can destroy the bloodstone?" "I have to," Lucas replied, his voice steady but strained. "If I don't, the pact will consume me, it'll consume Elena. It'll destroy everyone." Yara chuckled softly, a sound more weary than amused. "You don't even know what you're up against, boy. Malachi is no ordinary vampire lord. He's bound to that stone, yes, but breaking it will do more than free you. It will unleash him in his true form. The creature that sleeps beneath that castle isn't like anything you've faced before. If you break the bloodstone, you'd better be ready to face a nightmare." Lucas clenched his fists. He had suspected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud made the dread settle deeper in his chest. "What do I need to do?" Yara sighed, her cloudy eyes narrowing as she studied him. "There's only one way. The stone is buried deep in the crypt, beneath layers of spells and wards. You'll need something to break through them, something stronger than any blade you carry. And once you do, once the stone is shattered, well, you'll need to make sure Malachi can't regain control. There's a dagger, forged long ago, that can wound him in his true form. It's hidden in the crypt with the bloodstone." "A dagger?" Lucas frowned. "How do I find it?" Yara smiled faintly. "You'll know when you see it. It's the only thing down there that wasn't made for Malachi. It's older than him, older than this land. It's what the old ones used to banish creatures like him. If you can get to it before he wakes, you might stand a chance." Lucas nodded, his resolve hardening. He would find the bloodstone. He would end this. For Elena. For the village. For himself. The night Lucas returned to the castle, the sky was moonless, the darkness thick and oppressive. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm broke, and the silence of the village felt unnatural. He moved quickly, avoiding the main gates and slipping through a hidden passage he had discovered during his years of servitude under Malachi's control. The castle was as cold and silent as a tomb. Shadows clung to the stone walls, and the few remaining servants moved like ghosts, their faces pale and hollow-eyed. Lucas's footsteps echoed faintly as he descended into the lower levels, following the instructions he had pieced together from the journal. The crypt lay beneath the castle, a forgotten chamber carved deep into the bedrock. The air grew colder as he descended, his breath visible in the icy gloom. The stairs seemed to spiral endlessly downward, and with each step, Lucas felt the weight of the blood pact tugging at his soul, as if Malachi could sense his approach. Finally, he reached the crypt. The massive stone doors stood before him, etched with ancient runes that pulsed faintly with dark magic. He hesitated for a moment, then drew the blade at his side and stepped forward. The doors groaned open, revealing a vast chamber lined with stone sarcophagi and towering statues of forgotten kings. In the center of the room, on a pedestal of black marble, sat the bloodstone. It glowed with a sickly red light, casting long shadows across the floor. Lucas approached cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and every instinct screamed at him to turn back. But he couldn't. He had come too far. He had no choice. As he neared the bloodstone, the ground trembled beneath his feet, and the shadows in the room seemed to twist and writhe. He could feel Malachi's presence, growing stronger with each passing second. The vampire lord was stirring, his power flooding the crypt as the bloodstone pulsed. Lucas gritted his teeth and raised his sword. He brought it down on the bloodstone with all the strength he could muster, and the impact sent a shockwave through the room. The stone cracked, a jagged fissure running through its center, and for a moment, everything was still. Then, the crypt erupted in chaos, the ground split open, and from the depths of the earth, Malachi rose. His form was no longer that of the elegant, pale vampire lord Lucas had known. This was something else entirely, a monstrous, winged creature, its eyes burning with the fire of 1,000 suns, its fangs glistening in the dim light. The bloodstone shattered completely, and Lucas was thrown back by the force of the explosion. He scrambled to his feet, his sword lost in the rubble, as Malachi's true form towered over him, wings spread wide, casting a shadow over the entire crypt. The vampire lord let out a roar, a sound that shook the very foundation of the castle, and lunged at Lucas with impossible speed. But Lucas was ready. He dove for the altar, where a silver glint caught his eye, the dagger Yara had spoken of, ancient and deadly. He grabbed it just as Malachi's claws raked the ground where he had been standing moments before. Lucas rolled to his feet, the dagger held tightly in his hand. The creature hissed, its eyes narrowing as it recognized the weapon. "This ends now," Lucas growled, his voice barely a whisper, but the weight of his words hung in the air. Malachi lunged again, but this time, Lucas was ready. He dodged the creature's swipe and drove the dagger deep into its chest. The vampire lord screamed, a sound so piercing that it reverberated through the crypt and into the very walls of the castle. Black ichor poured from the wound, and Malachi's form began to wither and twist, but even as the life drained from the creature, its eyes locked onto Lucas, and a wicked smile curled across its monstrous face. "You may destroy me," Malachi rasped, "but the curse is never truly broken. My blood is in you." With that, the creature collapsed, its body disintegrating into ash, leaving only the faintest trace of its power lingering in the air. Lucas fell to his knees, panting and trembling. The crypt was silent once more, the bloodstone reduced to dust. It was over. Or so he hoped. Lucas returned to the village the next morning, the dawn breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The villagers gathered in silence as he walked through the square, their eyes wide with awe and fear. They could see the change in him, the exhaustion, the weight of what he had done. Elena ran to him, her arms wrapping around his waist, and for a moment, Lucas allowed himself to feel the relief of her warmth. She was alive. The village was safe. But deep inside, he knew Malachi's final words still lingered like a shadow over his soul. The curse may have been broken, but its stain would never truly wash away. As long as he lived, he would carry Malachi's blood within him, a reminder of the price he had paid to save those he loved. The villagers hailed him as a hero, but Lucas knew better. He had won the battle, but the war within him had just begun.